Happy World Bee Day, everybody. What an amazing day here in Brisbane. We're out in the Brisbane wetlands, the beautiful Brisbane wetlands, celebrating World Bee Day this morning, and we're really pleased to have you on board, viewing from your leisurely homes, your home offices, your home couches, perhaps your offices. You're taking a break from what has been a very interesting and wonderful time, or strange time indeed. But forget about all those times. We're here today to be taken by the wonder of the bee. In fact, the wonder of over 25,000 species of bees globally. 25,000 species of bees globally is what exists throughout the world. In Europe, in Asia, in the Americas, in the Australias, through the Philippines. Mostly native to each continent. Here in Australia, we have nearly 2,000 to 2,500 native bees that were here and have been here for eternity, for millions and millions of years. Today, we're going to be looking into the wonderful world of the honeybee. Just like last week, during our Facebook Live, we looked into the wonderful world of the Australian native social bee, the Tetragonula hawkingsi. The European honeybee is a very different kind of bee, and one that we at B1/3 Neighbourhood Honey and at West Village celebrate on the daily. With 5 beehives positioned above the West Village precinct, the West Village precinct is contributing to over 400,000 bees within the local ecosystem of West End, Highgate Hill, and that 3 or 4 kilometre radius of the area. Now, we thought, why not take a bit of a change of pace and pivot out here to a new and different site so we can have a look at a wide variety of what bees are and how they act, how they grow, the different phases of growth through the European beehive. And maybe you're interested on World Bee Day, May the 20th, today, to think about getting into bees, whether that be through the acquisition and the caretaking and the stewardship of a native beehive, or maybe it's through a little bit more of a daring approach to getting into European bees. I'm going to be walking you through the processes of keeping European bees today, some of the pros, some of the dangers, the threats that bees are under, and that's what today is all about. World Bee Day is all about raising awareness and bringing a global consciousness to the role that bees play in our ecosystem. Bees contribute to over 1/3 of our global food supply, and that's where B1/3 really started out, is protecting and conversing about the ideologies around our food system, how we need to be very, very conscious and caring to our broader ecosystem so we can produce food for the future. Bees pollinate. They fly out of their hives on the daily. They wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning and they come back at 6 p.m. at night when the sun goes down. They pollinate flowers. They visit flowers within a 5 kilometre radius of where their hive is positioned, and they are the best scouts. They smell, they see, they scout out different pockets that are in flower in that 5 kilometre radius section or area, and then they come back with messages of prosperity to the rest of the colony. They come back and communicate those messages of prosperity, and they say 1.2 kilometres south to southeast there is a beautiful pocket of land that is in full flower, and it has a ripe nectar and a very rich and mineral dense pollen that we should go and collect. They perform a small dance, they communicate through small and intricate sounds, and then they take the rest of the foraging bees with them out to that food source, and they gather and they protect that food source and they bring it all back into the hive, and that's where we get the production of honey. So being honeybees, they are native to the European landscape. They are used to harsh winters and bright, beautiful, mild summers. But they're a perfect fit for Australia and the rest of the world because they are the most efficient and effective pollinator when it comes to visiting as many flowers as a bee can visit in a day's work. And as an extra benefit to that, if bees are cared for in a controlled and managed environment, we can harvest small amounts of honey from the hard work that those bees are performing. Today, we're going to be getting into what is known as a nucleus hive and working our way through all the way up to what is known as a production hive, a full-fledged production hive that is constantly gathering surplus nectar. And that's the hives that we as beekeepers work towards building as many of as we can. So we start off with small nucleus hives with only a couple of hundred bees or a couple of thousand bees, a laying queen bee, and some foundation or a framework for them to work on and build on and lay eggs in. And then we build that colony up through careful positioning in diverse ecosystems to provide that colony of bees with a sufficient food source of carbohydrates in the nectar that they find from flowers. That's their sugar source. The nectar is their sugar source that we know as honey. Then we always make sure that they're fed a very mineral-rich and nutrient-rich diet. And that is what we know as pollen. So the bees collect pollen from a flower when they go to visit and pollinate that flower, and they transfer pollen from flower to flower to flower, and then you get this beautiful and magical act of or motion of cross-pollination, where one flower species is mixed with another flower species, and those two pollens intersect, and they almost help each other mate, help each other come to life and produce a viable seed or a viable fruit, vegetable, nut at the end of the day. So flowering is a very beautiful part of the process, and bees depend on those flowers and those plants to come to flower. So it's not just about bees that we always think about, but on World Bee Day we're thinking about the whole broader ecosystem and the ecosystem that our bees are living within. So I ask you, keep an eye out over winter and through the upcoming spring. Keep an eye out for native bees visiting your gardens. Keep an eye out for European bees visiting your gardens. Provide water for those bees, because bees drink a lot of water. And maybe you could even start planting some flowers over winter. Some flowers, some plants that will produce beautiful flowers for those bees to eventually visit. And think year round. Things that flower perhaps in winter, in spring, in summer and in autumn. You can stagger your gardens so you can always have a fresh and abundant supply of food for your local bee population. So first of all, we're going to get into a nucleus hive just down the way. I'm going to light up my smoker just up here. We use a beautiful paper bark, which is just torn from dry paper bark trees, and that paper bark acts as a very, very I guess active burner, you could say. Just got to try and find my lighter. Where could my lighter be? Oh, give me 1 second. I'm going to run and grab my lighter. A beekeeper can't be a beekeeper without their smoker, that's for sure. And always have a lighter or a box of matches on board. So the smoker essentially is an important tool for us as beekeepers. We have two important tools as beekeepers. We have the bee smoker, which we use a dry, cool burning fuel for. In this case, a nice dried paper bark that produces a very cool smoke that isn't hot for the bees. And then we have our hive tools. You've got two options of hive tools. You've got an Australian style J tool with this J action on the end, and that allows you to lever the frames up when you're inside the hive. You've got this American hive tool as well, which is a little bit more, I guess, rudimentary. It's got a scraping end, just like the Australian hive tool, and it's got a prying end on the end that we open the frames up inside the hive with. I prefer the American hive tool, but it's really, I guess it's user-defined in a lot of ways. Now, if we just come down to the entrance of the hive, we're going to have a look at the activity that's happening in this hive. Now, this hive is quite active for this time of year. There's a lot going on here. I can smell the nectar in the air, the beautiful tea tree that's coming to flower only recently in the area. This area has a number of different flowering species local to this area that the bees love collecting, and they do very well out here in the Brisbane wetlands. And that includes mangroves, tea trees, leptospermums, so your classic manuka, for example, classically coming from New Zealand. We have many species of leptospermum manuka here in Australia. In fact, 83 varieties, 60 or so of which are actually active and produce an active type of honey. Now, honey varieties come from the flower that the bees are visiting. They don't come from the species of bees that the beekeeper is dealing with. So I get asked that question a lot. How is honey produced? What species of bees are being used? It's actually the flowers that the beekeeper puts his bees or her bees onto that produce that certain flavoured nectar. So we're going to move down to our smaller hives. We're seeing what an active hive looks like with a lot of activity, a lot of pollen coming in. I can smell the nectar in the air, but pollen is rich. That means the bees are bringing in minerals, vitamins, nutrients. They're bringing in amino acids, fatty acids, and proteins into the hive, which is a really good sign. Every 3 or 4 bees is actually coming in laden with pollen. So I'm super happy with that. We're going to squeeze down to the smaller hives, and we'll see where bees start out as a small colony. Wonderful. So what we've got here, we've got 2 smaller hives. The one that you saw before was a 3-box hive that we started out on. We're going to be going into what is a smaller beehive with a smaller population. And we start off as beekeepers with what is known as a nucleus hive. A nucleus hive is a starter hive. If we pan over to this green hive here, this is what is known as a double nucleus hive. It has one entry, a small reduced entryway here. There's a limited number of frames, 6 frames in the box, and usually when we start off in beekeeping, we start with a nucleus hive because that is, I guess that is the first steps of breeding a new colony and building a new colony up to full health. This is a double box nucleus, so they were doing so well we gave them an extra box. But you'd start off with 1 box normally with 6 or 5 frames in it. That'll have a queen, a whole bunch of about maybe 5,000 female worker bees, and maybe a few male bees if it's that time of season. But a nice fresh queen bee who's laying well, who's got a good attitude about life, and those worker bees are there to support her. So this is a double nucleus box. Once they move out of this double nucleus or out of your single nucleus, you're going to move into a 9-frame or a 10-frame brood super. So we use the word brood just like chickens. When chickens are brooding, they're laying eggs. The mother hens are laying eggs. And this brood super is where the nest of the colony is positioned. Now normally we work the hives from behind the hive, so we do all of our work from behind the hive, so we don't interrupt the flight path and flight patterns of the bees coming in from the flowers, the foraging bees, because if we do that, then they become disoriented and they become a little bit aggravated if we stay there for too long. But thankfully today is only a short session, and we won't be spending too much time as we normally would inside the hive. So you can see that I use my hive tool to lever up. I'm using my smoke just to let the bees know that we've arrived. And the smoke is essentially used as a tool to push and herd the bees around. So you can see as I open that up, they've built some beeswax. They're populating the top of the lid, and they are crowding over the hive there as well, covering most of those 9 frames, which is a really good sign. So what I do, just to very gently place this lid over, then I come behind the hive, bit of smoke over the top, and we just leave all of this webbing up here. This is what the bees use inside the hive for a number of different purposes. They use it to, all of this, I guess, comb webbing on top of the hive is used to guard pests in. They use it to create airflow patterns throughout the hive. They use it just as surplus space filler. Bees are very efficient with the space that they use inside their hive. And you'll notice that I'm not wearing a veil. European bees are a little bit different to native bees. I will, however, just for cautionary sake, throw on my veil because I think it's good practice now that we've opened up the hives. And I don't need to use a full suit. You don't need to use a full suit if you're comfortable in just a head veil. And really it's just to protect the sensitive parts of the body, i.e. the face. So here's a bit of smoke, and we're going to go in and have a look. We work our way through the hive. So we always start on the edge of the hive when we're working our brood super, because we want to get a good representation or a good idea of how that colony is doing and how the queen is doing inside that colony. So always applying a little bit of smoke. We've got these bridging combs that the combs are joined. So we actually go through and just separate some of the wax that the bees have built between the frames. We then use our hive tool to pry open the hive and separate all of the glue and the propolis. If you listened in last week, you will have learnt about propolis and the beautiful medical properties of propolis. The bees use propolis inside the hive to seal up all of the small gaps, all of the gaps in between these frames that you see, all of the edging. It's also used as a medicinal property inside the hive. So these outside frames, you can see, are just beautiful honey. The bees are still building down that gorgeous honey that we can have a look inside of if we peel this back. That is what it's all about, that beautiful honey there. So the bees, as soon as I peel that open, the bees are straight to it. They're fixing that up. They've got a good understanding of what's going on. They can see the honey's dripping, and within no time, that frame will be cleaned back up by the bees and that honey will be restored. So I do that just to give you a demonstration of, we'll come back to that hive. You'll see just how quickly those bees jump onto it. Now that frame is about twice as heavy. You can see that the bees haven't fully built down into the frame. And this colony is very special indeed, in that it's actually taken 3 full seasons for this colony and this queen to build the confidence. That's almost 3 years to build the confidence to do what she's doing now. So I'm very pleased to see such a great population in this colony. What you want to see inside a beehive is bees covering all the frames, because that means that the family is large, the family is prosperous. Once we start moving into the center, you can see some darker honey. Still, we're just dealing with some honey frames on the outside. They use the honey frames as an insulator. They also use the honey frames, obviously, as their carbohydrate and immediate food source. So, oh, the scents and the smells are gorgeous. Now, as we move closer, you can see less and less capped honey in here, and I can see some empty cells that may have been used by the queen to lay eggs. I'm going to apply some smoke over top. Okay, and now I can see from above, I'm looking into the hive on an angle, and I can see from above that we're starting to hit the nest. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about brood. We're talking about the brood that the queen lays. So she lays the eggs, and the worker bees, which are the predominant bees on here, they then feed those eggs through a larval stage, a small grub. They feed it with proteins, amino acids, minerals, the pollen, as well as the carbohydrate. Just a mixture of those two food sources. That grub then hatches into, so that egg hatches into a grub. That grub then forms and pupates into a vertical or a standing up pupa, and that pupa then gets capped off with these light brown cell cappings that you can see here. Then that pupa then forms over the course of about another week and a half to its point where it will then, the bee that is inside each one of these individual hexagon cells will scratch or chew her way out of that cell and come into the world. So she will spend almost a day chewing her way through this brown surface on top. She will emerge into the colony to meet her sisters, her brothers, and her Royal Highness, the Queen. But I can see in here, I can see some good eggs in there, I can see some grubs in the empty cells. I'll do a little bit of a peek around for the Queen, so we might be able to spot the Queen when we're in here. But as we move across the hive even further, see how when I spray the smoke or puff the smoke, all the bees disappear. So it allows me just to work the hive without damaging or hurting any bees or killing any bees. I'm very conscious of my actions inside the hive. And my eyes are scanning. My eyes are always scanning to see what's going on in the base of those cells, using the light around me. It's always fascinating to see how well developed some of these colonies get after such a struggle period. And this last season has been such a difficult season for the bees. There's been minimal nectar, there's been minimal pollen, it's been such a period of drought all over Australia for every beekeeper and all of the bees, both native and European. So it's great to see some of these bees with some stored honey in there, feeling much better and looking much better. But this is essentially what you want to get to before you even consider producing any honey as a beekeeper. This is a hive that is in the early stages of becoming the early to mid stages of becoming what is known as a production hive. That production hive, once it's ready, once the colony is fully populated with bees in this brood super or this brood box, you then place a queen excluder on top of the brood box, which excludes the queen from coming up into what will become the production chambers, also known as the honey supers, the honey boxes, where we produce pure honey. So all of the nesting, all of the eggs, all of the larvae, the queen and her nurse and attendant bees live down in this bottom box where they have a direct entry and exit to the outside world. And then everything above that bottom box is traditionally, in beekeeping, used for honey production only. So I'll just have a quick squeeze and just pop over and see if I can see this queen on the other two frames. Okay. I didn't check the first couple of frames that came out, so we may have missed her there, but look, we'll do our best. And I'm scanning my eyes are scanning as hard as they can, looking for any sign of abnormality in terms of the bee size, and that will give me an indication of perhaps that is the queen that I'm looking at if I see an abnormality in bee size. Beekeepers become very good with their eyes because they're searching in the midst of 50, 60, 70,000 bees in a colony just to find one individual queen bee. But it was a late idea getting into this hive, so we might close this hive up. Can't find her. She could be on the edge of the box. Make sure I don't squash any bees. Give the bees a bit of a warning that we'll close it up. And then look at that. Right where I put all that honey, I broke open that honey, you can see the bees crowding around there. You can see the bees working around there to clean that honey up. And within about half an hour to an hour, I would say, that section of broken honeycomb will look like the rest of this frame. They act so quickly as a colony. They work together, they support each other, and they don't complain, they just get on with the job. I think we as humans could maybe learn a thing or two from bees. Now, I'm gonna, with these bees on the edge of the box, because I don't want to squash any of them, I'm going to actually give them a bit of a shake. Now, this is a great thing. If you can zoom in right on where my finger is, you can see this little brown beetle. Little brown beetle. Can you see that? No. Might come over and show you. This is one of the pests inside the hive. This little brown beetle here. Can you see that? Yeah, so that little brown beetle is crawling underneath the bees. There it is. That is called the African small hive beetle. That is an imported pest. This African small hive beetle has a hard exoskeleton shell. I've just cracked it because I don't like it in my hive, so it's no longer living. But that small hive beetle actually is one of the worst pests that Australia now has inside its borders. It lays eggs in it lays its own eggs in the pollen of the hive, which is the protein, and those eggs then hatch out and take over and decimate a full colony of bees in the matter of days. So if the conditions are ripe, then these small hive beetles will fly in for many, many tens of kilometres in search of a bee colony, and they will fly in fully protected by their exoskeleton shell, and the bees can't do anything about it. They can't sting it, they can't grab it. All they do is try and herd the beetle into these protective jails that they build through the honeycomb structure. Now, beeswax is amazing. I want to get at least a couple of questions around beeswax by the end of this, so fire them through. Let's just shake the bees in there. I give them a bit of a smoke, so there's no more bees on top on that lid. I then center up all of my frames so they're back to how they were. All the spacing's correct. and I line this up. How was this positioned? I think it was like that. And then I just put my weight behind it, put the rock that was on top back on, make sure the winds don't get it, and we're going to go into what is known as a production hive. So here we've got a double box hive. This is what I would see as one of our production hives. Now it's really interesting because I've noticed only very minimal activity at the front of the hive this morning. I gave it a bit of a lift to see how it was doing and I thought, geez, that's really light. So there could be a problem inside the hive. We're problem solvers as beekeepers, and we should be problem solvers on a daily basis when we're working with nature, because sometimes nature isn't always perfect, especially in a managed sense. And I can see already when I've opened up the top of this box, there's very minimal bees in this box. So what I'm going to do, you want to always give bees the right amount of space. You never want to give them too much space, and you certainly don't want to give them not enough space, because you will then run into problems around population control and population versus space required. So this colony's got a few bees in it. Doesn't look like there's much going on. This could well have been a colony that may have swarmed or may have found it hard to reproduce a new queen. Not seeing any brood in there. Minimal bee numbers. So what I'll do, because I'm not liking what I'm seeing in here, there's not a lot going on. There's a few bees in here, not as many as we'd like to see. I'm going to actually, at the end of today, I'm going to shake all these bees out, and these bees are going to go from this colony and they're going to fly to the colony next door. So they're going to fly to the colony next door, and we're going to merge two colonies of bees, because that colony won't make it through winter. All right, now put some more bark on. Fantastic. Bit of weight behind this. And there's bees up in the top box, which is really quite a good thing. Usually through winter we would always reduce our beehives to 2 boxes or 1 box, because especially through such a tough season, we don't want to expect our bees to work too hard and take care of too much space inside the hive. So even if the colony is healthy, we don't want to leave too much space inside the hive, because it's going to be a lot for those bees to moderate their internal temperature. Did you know that bees actually maintain their internal hive temperature at a consistent 35 degrees Celsius? Pretty amazing for such a small creature. They work as a collective to warm the hive throughout cooler days and months by humming and vibrating to create the warmth and clustering together. They also, through the hotter months, they also use a fanning technique. So they will moderate the temperature inside the hive by expelling live bees onto the front of the hive, creating what is known as festooning or bearding. And that bearding action is just basically thousands of bees holding onto each other in almost a ladder-like way. And they will then go out to collect water from the local mangroves or local ponds, or maybe your backyard. They will then come back with that water and stand at the front door and use their wings to fan that water through the hive to create an air-conditioned cycle inside the hive. So they'll circulate the hot air out of the hive, which is pretty amazing. They're amazing moderators of their environment. Now, that box is heavy. The bees have been onto something. That's great. So that box weighs about 25-30 kilos. This box is very minimal, so they've got stores for winter which will leave them, and you can see here they've just been building out on this box that we gave them about 2 weeks ago. You can see this is how the frame will start out. Oh, they've glued everything together. Frame will start out as just a simple hexagon wax sheet foundation frame, and the bees will, so if you look down in this corner, you can see it's a very thin, flat, hexagon printed beeswax surface, and then and we give that to the bees with these wires to hold the structure of the colony, the structure of the frame. And the bees will actually produce beeswax through a very amazing process, which I hope to get some questions about at the end. And they will actually secrete this beeswax and build and 3D print this structure. They'll 3D print it out on both sides, and then they'll use that structure to fill with honey or eggs or pollen, whatever the colony needs at that time. So once that 3D printing has happened, we then move into the next phase, which is filling with honey in the honey box. You know, all kinds of critters live in here amongst the bees. There's a cockroach living inside the hive, a baby cockroach, mini cockroach. I mean, bees are not fussed. Bees are not fussy creatures. They know that cockroach is not a threat. They just get on with the work that they need to get on with. They go out and collect the honey, they store the honey away, and look how perfect those hexagon cells are. It's absolutely astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. These bees are feeding. They've all got their heads in. They're either depositing honey, depositing nectar, or they might be building and secreting wax to cap it off with this wax capping. And that wax capping actually indicates to the beekeeper and the bees that honey is mature and ripe for storage. So that honey will actually, when it's capped, last for millennia. It will last till it'll last through eons of time, because it is the perfect preserved food product, the perfect level of moisture and the perfect level of sugars, perfect level of everything. It's like Mother Nature's gold. So as we really happy with this colony so far, good numbers, small amounts of production, and then we go into the brood box. And usually I'm expecting to see the brood box well populated, but not overly active. It's peel up the queen excluder, which is this one right here. So that's the queen excluder. You can get them in plastic or in metal. Give them a bit of a shake off. Now, we always shake off because the queen might be on the bottom of it, and we don't want our queen out of the hive. We always want to make sure that she's in the hive and doing what she needs to do. Now, this is what I call a very, very nice, comfortable colony at this time of year for out here in the wetlands. Good number of bees. Again, you can see that different coloured frame, but still this is a brood frame. This brood frame still has that light brown, well, now it's dark brown because it's slightly more aged, surface. So we can see as beekeepers and as bee enthusiasts that the queen is laying eggs, the worker bees and the nurse bees are capping those cells and those eggs and those pupa off, and they are pupating and maturing into live bees eventual to hatch. We have good stores around the outside of the honeycomb, outside of the brood frame. We've got our main population creation in the middle. We then usually have pollen or protein amino acids above the brood, the light brown, and then we have our honey on the outside. So the bees are very intelligent in the way that they lay their eggs, they build their nests, and they have all of their food sources in immediate reach on these brood frames. And over time, these frames will darken. As you can see at the bottom, this frame is quite old, but it's still very soft. It's still very soft, so very fragile. And that's fine. It's just what happens. You know, there's lots of bees walking over this frame. It starts off light and golden, and eventually gets to the point where it's so dark and so used that the bees will only use it for the storage of certain things inside the hive. They will no longer, the queen will no longer lay eggs inside the hive, and they will use it just for storing honey or just for storing pollen. But it's really rich in all of these goodies, all of these natural goodies, that darker comb. So really happy with this hive, good numbers, really nice eggs, good laying pattern. Whoop. Almost tripped over there. Hazard rich, these bee yards. Let's have one more look at this frame and be happy with it. Yeah, nice fat bees. We love good fat bees, means they're healthy. Means they're getting on well, they're eating all the right foods. Okay. We just walk through the hive looking good, full frame of eggs, good bit of honey. Very happy. I'll look at 2 more, see if we can spot the queen. It's just such a peaceful exercise checking our bees, and I encourage anyone who's looking to get into bees to look into attending a workshop. We'll be running workshops through the Bee 1/3 Neighbourhood Honey website throughout late spring and early summer. It's going to be a busy season for us, but we really want to try and get you into bees, give you the experience that you desire, because it's best to check whether you're comfortable with bees before you get into bees. It's a big undertaking. You're taking responsibility of an ecosystem of potentially 30, 40 or 50,000 living beings. And, you know, sometimes things can go wrong. Sometimes if they're not managed correctly, bees can become difficult to work with. They can become aggressive. If you've got the wrong type of genetics inside your hive, they can become aggressive and difficult to manage. But if you manage them correctly and you know what you're getting yourself into, you'll be able to make the right decisions throughout the season to encourage that colony to do what you'd like it to do, and to meet the calm nature that urban environments require us to adhere to, especially when we're keeping bees in our backyards or on our property, and we've got neighbours to consider and we've got people all around us to consider. So each one of these beehives is completely independent to the next, which means that it has its own queen, it has its own worker bees, it has its own energy, has its whole own attitude. This hive that I'm in right now might be completely different to the hive that I open up next, and that's completely fine, because we need to be ready for anything when we're holding a couple of beehives in one zone. And bees are bees. We've got to let nature be nature. And they're loving it out here in the Brisbane wetlands. Just like they love it in the middle of the city. I mean, West Village is an amazing place to keep bees because it's got all of that Highgate Hill, Wollongabba, West End, South Brisbane area to forage from. And there's so much diversity in that area. And I thank all those people in that pocket of West End, Highgate Hill, East Brisbane, South Brisbane and Wollongabba for planting so much beautiful food for the bees to feed on. They love it. They can't get enough of it. And we see what they're bringing back on a regular basis, and seriously, those bees can't complain. Very lucky. Speaking of which, jump onto the West Village Facebook page and see the beautiful giveaway they're giving away for World Bee Day today. I encourage you to engage with that as much as possible. Share it with friends through your networks. It's an awesome giveaway. They're giving away 2 packs worth about $150 each. Jump on board. How are we doing for time, guys? We might start looking at some questions if we want to fire some questions away. Maybe we'll take a move over to these beehives over here. I might open up a hive so we can ask some questions that might pertain precisely to the hives themselves. One thing while we're waiting for the questions is Pat the cameraman, come on in, and we're going to see, like I said, if you come down low, we've got our brood box where the bees are coming and going from. We then have our queen excluder in between the brood box and the honey chamber or the honey super, and that queen excluder stops the queen from entering up to lay eggs in the pure honey. But here on this hive, you'll actually see between the grey box and the green box this board that I've placed in, and this is known as a clearer board. This clearer board is I guess you could say it's an exit board for the bees. This box of honey that we have up top might have been full of honey. When it's full of honey, we then put this clearer board on, and that box, when it's full of honey and the hive is bustling, and we don't want to disturb the hive, obviously, when we're harvesting honey. So what we do is we put this one-way exit board onto the hive, where all of the bees from this top box can travel down through 4 individual exits inside the hive, back down into their empty honey super or their half-full honey super, and then down into the nest. So we never kill a bee or hurt a bee or disrupt the colony because of this very passive and non-aggressive way of harvesting honey. So when we come back in a week's time after we've implemented this clearer board, we will see what lays beneath, and it's going to be not much. We can see this box in particular was actually used because there wasn't enough honey in the area, but look at that, not a bee to be seen inside that box. Not a bee to be seen. And here's the clearer board. You've got your 4 exits that the bees can go down. So when it comes to harvesting honey and not disrupting the bees, there are very affordable, easy and passive ways to achieve that. You don't need to spend big money on any kind of internal hive tapping or honey tapping system. This is a very easy and affordable way to get started in bees by using things that are proven and that work for the commercial sector. How are we going? We've got some questions coming through.
Yeah, so mate, there's a couple wax questions. Maddie McSorley would like to know how bees create wax.
Fantastic question, Maddie. When bees go out to collect nectar from flowers, they are landing on the flower, and they're collecting 2 things from the flower, like I mentioned early on in the piece. They're collecting nectar from the base of the flower, right at the bottom of the flower, and they're collecting pollen. Pollen they put on their legs, nectar they put in their stomachs. When they come back into the hive, they remove actually the first thing they do when they come back into the hive is they meet another bee waiting at the front doorstep for them to arrive back. And then they kiss, they extend their tongues through some form of telescopic form. They meet their tongues in the middle, and one bee who's been out visiting the flower will transfer the nectar from her stomach to the bee that is on the receiving end. And that will happen a number of times inside the hive. That will happen 3 or 4 or 5 times, where one bee will turn to the next, it will transfer that honey to another bee, and that's what actually adds the enzymes, the gut flora of the bee. The honey stomach flora of the bee will be transmitted into that honey, and then it will be stored away in the beeswax that we see. But the beeswax, how is it made? Before any honey can be stored away, before any eggs can be laid inside the hive, before anything can happen inside the hive when it comes to growth or population, the bees need to find nectar from flowers, bring them back in their honey stomachs, and actually swallow and process that honey. They actually secrete this waxy oil, or a slightly hardened waxy oil, from glands on the back of their body. So on the hind of their body, right near where you'd believe their stinger would be, they have these tiny slits underneath their tail. And those slits actually secrete beeswax. So they ingest the nectar, which is a sugary syrup made by flowers, and they swallow it, they process it through their organs, and they secrete it through glands on the back of their body. They then use their 6 feet to grab those waxy pieces that they've secreted, and then they formulate and mold those waxy tiny little pellets into hexagon shapes. And that is where we have beeswax from. Bees create beeswax from the process of collecting nectar from local flowers, bringing it back, swallowing it, and then secreting it, and then molding it into the beeswax. It's an amazing process, but they do that all by themselves with no help from us.
Adrian Rigby would like to know what you do with the wax caps when you remove them to extract the honey.
Awesome question, Adrian. Yeah, so it is certainly a process. Extracting honey is a whole nother Facebook Live that we've got to do. It's an awesome process. It's so much fun. It's a sticky process. Out here is an enjoyable, calm, really kind of connective process. Honey, on the other hand, is heavy, it's sticky. There's all of these different stages that we've got to go through, and one of those stages is removing that wax capping. I'll see if I can find an example of what that wax capping would look like, just to give everyone an idea. Okay, I believe this colony will have some, because they're pretty strong. Okay. Okay, so the wax capping, when we take it back to harvest, is actually nothing is wasted in the process. So what we'll see here is what Adrian's referring to in the wax capping is this white wax over the top. The bees use that capping, or they actually seal the honeycomb cell, each individual honeycomb cell off, and it's just beeswax. So then when we take it in to extract the honey which lies beneath that wax capping, we scrape off the top surface with a little bit of honey and wax mixed in, and we actually run it through a beeswax press. So it's something similar to a wine press or a grape press, but it is just an automated coil press that squeezes all that remaining honey out of the wax, and we're left with a raw product of probably 2% honey and 98% beeswax and anything else that comes off in that process of decapping. That then gets rendered down in a 44 gallon or 200 litre drum with a bit of heat. It gets taken to liquid. All of the sediment and dirt drops out of the wax, and we end up with a golden pure beeswax at the end of it that we sell, that we use in beeswax food wraps, that we use in candles, that we render down into smaller blocks for you to do things at home in arts and crafts, or however you'd like to use it. So the beeswax cappings end up with all of this other wax that we scrape off the top. So we always, when we're cleaning our frames in the extraction process, we always clean our frames up so they're nice and neat, and we take off any little 2 or 3 grams of wax here. We scrape all of our frames, all of our lids, so they come back to the hive nice and clean. So that's what we do with our wax cappings.
Adrian was also wondering about the weaker hive that you looked at earlier.
Yep.
Whether you believe it to be queenless, and whether you can talk through the process of merging hives.
Yeah, absolutely. So that hive will be queenless. Looks like it's been queenless for some time. Probably didn't pick up on it, or obviously didn't pick up on it last time we were here. It's been such a dry season that our visits to hives have been less and less, so we don't disturb them as much as we may in other seasons and better seasons for the bees. But the process of merging is, you can do it one of two ways. If you've got a beehive nearby within a metre or a metre and a half of the hive that you're merging from, and two, you can essentially just shake all the bees out of the hive that you're trying to close down, shake all the bees out, and they will fly and hit the ground and fly up into a cluster, and then the beehive that you're hoping that they merge to, you just push a little bit closer towards the beehive that you're merging from. So in this instance, if you want to merge, you kind of pan over here, we can see these two beehives are relatively close. They're within a metre and a half. So what we will do is we'll shake all of the bees out of this one onto the ground, and we will pull this beehive, the larger beehive, one space closer. So all the bees that thought their beehives were here in the hive that we're closing down, they will then fly straight into this hive and take up residence there. That's one way. The other way is, of course, to do a larger merge, where if you're dealing with a larger colony and you want to merge the two, you take the boxes of the old hive, so you dismantle the hive that you're trying to close down or merge from. You open up the hive that you're merging to, and you place a sheet of newspaper, 2 sheets of newspaper across the top. You will then use a pin or maybe your hive tool, and you just poke some holes in that newspaper, and then you place the boxes from the closing down hive on top of that newspaper. And what happens is the pheromone from the bottom hive will seep up through the newspaper into the top hive, and vice versa. And you have these 2 pheromones, these 2 energies that are merging in the middle. And then within a day or two, the bees from the top hive will start to chew through that newspaper and actually merge themselves into the hive below. And then they just become one. And after about 3 or 4 days, a week, you then get a merging of the 2 colonies, and then you take the 2 top boxes off and you just merge them into the initial now mother colony box. That's it. Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today on World Bee Day. Please don't hesitate to, like I said, jump onto the West Village Facebook page, enter the competition. It's a ripe competition, and join us on Instagram.